Okay, it's recorded.
So it began, as things often do nowadays, on Twitter, and you all at some point saw a tweet from a New York writer named Mary South, and she had a collection of short stories, You Will Never Be Forgotten, that had just been published, and she had to cancel all of her events after she'd planned to promote this collection she was so excited about. And she figured that other authors were probably in a similar situation, books that are about to come out or came out after the pandemic. Now, I had a memoir, Uncomfortably Numb, that had been released in this very room here at Tatnuck on March 7th, days before the world shut down because of COVID. And it was my only in-person event. And like a lot of the authors in this room, we had to cancel our promotional events to spread the word about our work. Now, Mary South's email came to me at just the right time. She had sent out an introductory email to all of the people who had reached out to her on Twitter. And this is what she wrote in part of her email. She wrote, "I'm fortunate that I was able to have a launch event before everything shut down," Mary wrote. She said she felt compelled to band writers together as we faced this strange new era with uncertainty and fear. And she wanted to, quote, do something active in order to help her stories and to see if other authors finding themselves in similar positions would want to plan events. The idea of helping to facilitate something where authors can signal boost each other and coordinate made me feel better. I also just wanted to connect with fellow authors who may also be feeling some worry or fluctuating feelings right now, to be less alone. And that was in early April of 2020, before we really knew what we were dealing with. And then in short order, over 70 authors took her up on this. We voted and came up with a name, Lockdown Literature, to represent that era in which we were in. We even made t-shirts. I don't remember who designed the logo. I was trying to remember that, trying to chase that down. Jessica created the logo. We started an Instagram account, Twitter accounts. We started booking events together. We had a weekly Zoom-based series that was co-hosted by a San Francisco bookshop, The Booksmith. That was also hosted with Ziziba, a West Coast literary magazine, and that took place over the summer of 2020. I met Leslie Gray Streeter that way, where she and I interviewed one another about our memoirs. Hers is Black Widow. And our members appeared at the Le Bleu literary salons, where I read again with Leslie, and then our superstar group member, Doug Stewart, author of Shuggy Bain, that went on to win every literary award on the planet. Christine Chu is here. Her novel Beauty was receiving raves, and she started hosting events on Twitter and Facebook and bringing together women to talk about femininity, health, and beauty. And Lockdown Lit members teamed up with that same San Francisco bookshop to feature our books. We put together groups that lists for book groups to tap if they wanted an author to zoom in to their event. But mostly we cheered each other on, we made connections, we formed virtual friendships across the country and across the globe. And it gave us a feeling of community in a time when we really, really needed it. So today I'm meeting these Lockdown Lit authors for the first time in person, and it's so exciting. And I'm thrilled that you've been able to come here to share your work and to just see one another. And so I'm thrilled that you're here. Now, the first author I'd like to introduce is novelist Christine Chu. She is the grand prize winner of the James Allen McPherson Award for her novel Beauty, which I loved, and also has Cape Cod scenes for those Massachusetts folks. She's also the author of Troublemaker and Other Saints, published by G.P. Putnam's and Sons. Troublemaker was an alternative selection for BOMC and QPB, a nominee for a BOMC First Fiction Award, and winner of the Asian American Literary Award. Chu curates and co-hosts the Penn Parentis Literary Salons in New York City, and she received her MFA in writing from Columbia. Welcome, Christina.
not going to be drinking after this. But it's great to be here and see you guys. I am not going to start from the beginning of the book. I usually start at the beginning, but because I actually want to read a scene that takes place in Cape Cod, it's in the middle, like later in the beginning, late beginning of the book, and it's about a woman named Amy, and she wants to be a designer, and she makes the mistake of meeting this older, established designer, and he takes interest in her, so she kind of goes along with it. And so at this point in the story, so he goes to the Cape and he's having a great time, and he wants her to stay with him. But she's like, I've got to get a job, and so I'm gonna go home. And he has basically a tantrum and gets really angry that she wants to go home. So he's being really bratty, and they have just been at the beach and they've been talking about each other's parents, and they've shared a really lovely moment. And then when they get to back to the house, she's going to get her suitcase and everything, he storms off and she's just kind of mystified as to what's going on. So I'm going to pick up at that point. When I return to the house and Jeff's still not back, I head down to the beach where he's sitting in the shade of the umbrella. I hug my knees beside him. It's low tide. The oysters are there for the picking. In the distance, beyond the sheltered cover, the ocean looks like long shards of floating glass. Give me the ring, he says. I forgot to mention that in the scene before this, they're at the general store and there's a little gumball machine, and he buys her a little plastic ring and she's wearing the ring. Give me the ring, he says. I slip it from my finger and hand it to him. He gets to his feet, winds up, and throws it into the bay. What was that for? I demand now. When he doesn't respond, I get to my feet. You know what? Fuck you. I march up the stairs, through the house, and out the front door to the car. See, I tell myself, you were right. You put yourself at his mercy by coming here, and now you are stuck. I'm about to knock on the neighbor's door when Jeff finally appears. He gets in, starts the car, and we drive in silence all the way to Hyannis. When we get to the bus depot, he asks me to wait. He needs to talk. But I shove the door open and get out. I tuck my suitcase from the back seat. Amy, he calls, rushing around to my side of the car. Please, I'm sorry, okay? Yeah, whatever, I say, marching towards the station, dragging the suitcase behind me. I love you, he says. 3 small words. Is he kidding me? In a movie, this would be the part where 2 quarreling lovers run into each other's arms. I turn to face Jeff straight on. I do, he says. I don't want to. I don't want to be that guy who needs the girl who doesn't need him. Heat rushes to my face. I feel sunburnt, even on the inside. You know me, remember? Well, you don't know me. I do, he insists. I do. Really? Well, then go back and get my fucking ring back. I tug the suitcase into the bus depot where I buy my ticket. He waits as I board, trying to hug me, but I push past him. He waves me off, but I shut my eyes until we're moving at a steady, even clip. I spend both legs of the trip home, bus and train, replaying everything in my mind. It's pure, unadulterated torture. I don't want to ever see him again, and yet maybe I'm going to die if I don't. My eyes are swollen, practically shut from crying. I don't arrive at Georgie's until 10 p.m. Georgie's her sister. Ma's back from her cruise, so I put on my sunglasses and hope she's already asleep. All I want is a shower, a shot of NyQuil, and a bed. As soon as I walk into Georgie's apartment, though, I know something's wrong. Ma and Georgie are sitting together at the kitchen table, each with a mug of Chinese tea. Ma's wearing a silky nightie with butterflies that someone younger might pass off as an evening dress. She's got a dour look on her face, like maybe her boyfriend broke up with her. Or maybe something's up with Dad? What's going on, I ask. Ma and Georgie exchange glances. What? Ma holds out a ring box, hand delivered from Tiffany's, with a small card attached. Maybe you should tell us, Georgie says. I open the card. It says, I can do better than that, Jay. Damn right you will, I think. No one's ever gonna treat me like that again. You look terrible, Georgie says, a line usually reserved for Ma. Nikusha, Ma asks, what's the crying about? It's just an apology of sorts, I say. Just a guy I'm dating, that's all. The boy just now at this Cape Cod, Ma asks? Friend, I correct. Worried that if Ma ever meets Jeff, she'll automatically judge him for being so much older than me. He wasn't nice, Ma asks. A total jerk, I say, unwrapping the baby blue paper and prying the box open. The cushion is white silk. Set inside it is a diamond ring, rectangular shaped, framed by small diamond chips. Ma gasps. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that looks like an engagement ring, Georgie says. Like, duh! Georgie frowns, but Ma stares at it, then back at me. What have you done, she says. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that book, so I appreciate that excerpt. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Leslie Gray Streeter. Yay! You've got a cheering section. She's an author, a veteran journalist, a playwright, and speaker whose memoir, Black Widow, was published in March 2020 by Little Brown and Company. Until recently, she was the longtime entertainment and lifestyle columnist and writer for the Palm Beach Post. A native of Baltimore, Maryland, and a University of Maryland graduate, she and her work have been featured in the Washington Post, the Miami Herald, the Seattle Times, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Atlantic, the Today Show, Sirius XM O magazine, and more. She lives with her son Brooks and her mother Tina in her hometown of Baltimore, which she moved back to last summer. She is, now this is from Leslie, not my commentary, she's a slow runner, an amateur vegan cook, and a true crime and law and order enthusiast who really should stretch more. Thank you, Leslie.
Okay, so this skirt catches on everything. It's super cute, but then I go, oh my god. Anyway, okay, so, okay.
Can you just show your skirt so everyone can see it on?
As
You're not in front of the camera.
A giant mess.
Yes.
As I make a giant mess with everything.
Yes.
If you didn't see it, I dropped water. It was beautiful. It was so amazing. Anyway, my book is a sad, funny book that's about the first year of the loss of my husband. So, but there's funny parts and I swear. So, do you guys want a sad part, a funny part, or a hopeful part? Hopeful. Okay. So most of the titles of the chapters are taken from TV show themes, because I'm a Gen X TV critic person, so that's what I do. Okay, this is ready to take a chance again, maybe, probably. I have a running list of the art that Scott has ruined for me by dying. Movies I can't watch anymore, songs I rush to turn off during the opening chords, books on our shelves my eyes quickly skip over. The list includes previous favorite, Sleepless in Seattle. Tom Hanks is a widower with a kid who's afraid of forgetting his mom. Most Gloria Estefan ballads about not being able to live without one's beloved. The Andy Griffith Show. Did Opie ever get therapy when his mom died? And our wedding song, Stephen Bishop's It Might Be You from the movie Tootsie. We chose that because I found the answer. There was no question. It was him. It was Scott. And now it's not. Stupid song. Scott's death did give me a new appreciation for a movie or two that I've been meh on before. One was Practical Magic, where reluctant witch Sandra Bullock conjures up a man to beat a family curse that prohibits her from love and collapses into guilty grief when he dies. She blames herself because she believes, even though they loved each other deeply and have 2 dear daughters, that maybe he died because she dragged him in a situation she created by trying to thwart her undeniable fate to be alone forever. But all's not lost. She eventually finds love with hot Aidan Quinn, who knows about her weirdness and her damage, but also her magic, and he loves her for all of it. Her first husband and his loss will always be a part of her life, but that becomes part of the foundation for a second chance. That meant nothing to 28-year-old single me, but it means a lot now. The other is Must Love Dogs, with John Cusack and Diane Lane as meet cute 40-somethings whose conflicts and bumbles are just annoying stumbling blocks on the way to the inevitable reunion and happy ever after. Nobody comes to these sorts of movies for the pretty people not to wind up together. It's a silly movie, but an interesting subplot involving Diane Lane's widowed father, played by Christopher Plummer, who's still super smooth, rest in peace, and a quirky, many times divorced lady named Dolly, played by Stockard Channing. Dolly falls helplessly in love with Christopher Plummer, because who wouldn't? Since he's dapper and quotes Irish poets at family gatherings, she thinks he might finally be that everlasting love that's always eluded her, but then has her heart broken when Christopher Plummer invites 2 other women to Thanksgiving dinner. That's shady. Use your words, Christopher Plummer, not multiple ambush dates. The first time I saw it, at 34, I identified with Dolly, the lonely lady who thought she'd finally found the one, and I considered Christopher Plummer to be the villain here. But in my widowhood, I get him. He appreciates the life he has, but he doesn't want to be lonely, but he's not lying to anyone either. I've had the love of my life, he tells Diane Lane, and he means it. At 34, I saw this as a selfish, stubborn fear of opening himself up that would allow him to play the geriatric field and deny happiness to poor Stockard Channing. But now, without my love, I get it. Movie Christopher Plummer had the most amazing life with his chosen partner, and it ended before he wanted it to. He's not looking for a replacement because as far as he's concerned, there's no replacement for that. He's good. And he's confident enough to say that he's got what he needs. That sort of certainty is not selfishness, it's power. God, I want that. I can't say if I'm more Sandra Bullock or Christopher Plummer in the situation because it's all too soon, and there aren't any hot, handsome men offering me that choice right now. Right now, it's me and my empty bed and my broken hearts, and there are parts of me, the lady parts, that occasionally remember they like being used. The rest of me can't imagine ever opening myself up to this kind of hurt. I hope I can prove to be a combination of both characters, that I can square my loss and the end of the love I thought was forever. Even in the sad, damaged state, I can see how it would be nice to have love or at least sex again, because in the 5 years I was with Scott, I was quite fond of that. And I really hate to think I only had a 5-year sex window. But I also want to have enough faith and love that I had to reconcile myself with this messy perfection of it, to know that even if I never find anyone else, I got more happiness than a lot of people do. But God, if you're listening, if you're reading this, know that that's really, really not the case. Thank you.
Wait, can I borrow that for a second?
Yes.
What I loved a lot about Leslie's book is the subtitle, A Sad, Funny Journey Through Grief for People Who Normally Avoid Books with words like journey in the title. So I just thought I would throw that in there because that just perfectly captures the dynamics of this book. Thank you, Leslie. Now, the next author I'd like to introduce is David Daly. And I just found out that he lives in Western Massachusetts, which is where I grew up, and we knew people in common, so this just kind of blew my mind. Because when you don't meet people in person, you don't really learn these things right away. Anyway, David Daly is the author of the national bestseller Rat Effed, and you can fill in the blank there, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, and the new book, Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. His journalism has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, and The Atlantic, among other publications. He is the former editor-in-chief of Salon. And about his book, Unrigged, he has written, Our democracy is under threat. Partisan gerrymandering, voter suppression, and assaults on election administration have imperiled the American experiment. Unrigged provides a playbook for how we fight back, grounded in the very real and inspiring victories won by citizens in red states, blue states, and purple states, including Florida, Michigan, Idaho, Utah, Ohio, and Maine. We welcome David.
Thank you. What a pleasure to get to do this in person and to meet all of you, to do an event with pants on. This is nice. Unrigged really began with a quest for hope. So it was nice to see Leslie use that same theme. I had written Rat Effed, which is a book about partisan gerrymandering. It tells the story of a Republican strategy that I think might be the most consequential over the course perhaps of the last several decades, called Red Map, which is short for the Redistricting Majority Project. What they effectively did was utilize the 2010 election, the census, the redistricting that followed in 2011 to take control of state legislatures in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, Georgia. Those states, in many ways, have been effectively living under minority Republican rule ever since, and as we know, the redistricting process going on right now, those states, many others, are facing another decade under similar, if not worse, conditions. And the book came out in 2016, and something else happened in November of 2016 that reminded a lot of people of the power of Republican minority rule, the structural advantages that they hold in the U.S. Senate, the Electoral College, as well as those that partisan gerrymandering provide. And so I would be asked to give a lot of talks about what had happened, and I could suck the oxygen out of the room. All these nice people with their resistance hashtags and their determination to fight back, and I would come in and talk about the double knot of unfairness that had tied our system into such profound hopelessness, and I wasn't helping myself, I wasn't helping them, and I wanted the black cloud above my head, like the guy from the Peanuts cartoon, to disappear. So I went out in search of those people and the stories that might provide a pathway forward and a roadmap for people trying to find their way out of this. I think it's a roadmap we still very much need today, and I found it. I found people who turned off Twitter and got out of their partisan news bubbles and went out locally to try to make differences in the places where they lived, where it could matter the most. I went to Michigan and met a young woman named Katie Fahey, 27 years old, who worked in a recycling plant. 2 days after the presidential election in November 16, she's already thinking ahead to what Thanksgiving dinner was going to be like that year with Trump voters and Bernie voters and Hillary voters. And she's imagining the mashed potatoes going through the air, right? The cranberry sauce up against the wall. And she gets on Facebook and she says, I want to do something about partisan gerrymandering in Michigan. If you also would like to do this, get in touch. And out of this Facebook post, it seems ridiculous, but it mobilizes thousands of people, and they begin a group called Voters Not Politicians. They investigate how to get a ballot initiative on, a constitutional amendment, And in November of 2018, 62% of Michiganders agreed, and they passed an independent redistricting commission that right now is drawing fair lines in Michigan that will save them from what has happened there over the course of the last 10 years.
Yes, yes.
Right? To Idaho and rode the Medicaid Express with these tremendous young activists, also in their 20s, who simply believed that their red state did not have to be as bright a red, as hopeless. This was one of the states that for years and years refused to expand Medicaid, even though the federal government would give you those dollars back through Obamacare. They also launch a statewide effort to do this. They go out, they buy an old RV, and they caravan to every single corner of the state. I joined them in Idaho Falls, and we went door to door on this hot day, and walked up this driveway, and there is a pickup truck in the driveway, and it's got a sticker on the back that says, "Vietnam, we were winning when I left." And I'm thinking to myself, we're not going to get a signature to put a Medicaid expansion on the ballot at this house. Why don't we go next door? We're going to get shot here, guys. They were winning in Saigon when this guy was there. But he opens the door and he says, yeah, my entire family falls into that hole. I'm going to sign this. I'm going to vote for this. And it was a powerful reminder that we can still persuade each other, we can still talk to one another, even if you're driving down the street and see that bumper sticker, you might not let that guy in, if he's merging. But there's something in common there. I'm down to Florida and met Desmond Meade, who you may have read about, who was behind a 2018 initiative there to reinstate the vote to 1.4 million people who had a felony conviction in their past in Florida, and who had lost the right to vote forever because of, effectively rules dating all the way back to the Jim Crow era that took that right away. 25% of the adult black population in Florida, for example. And Desmond has this unbelievable glow, and he, yet not too many years earlier, had just been in incredible pain, addicted to drugs. His mother dies, and he is kicked out of the army on a weapons charge, and he finds himself walking across a railroad tracks in Miami waiting to jump in front of the train that day, and the train, it doesn't come, and he literally walks across the tracks. You can't make it up. And finds himself outside of a rehab center, and he gets his life back together again, and he ends up getting his college degree and his law degree, and becoming executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, and he leads this mighty moral coalition that in 2018, 64% of voters in Florida passed to reinstate these voting rights. It's just a tremendously powerful story. But I think my favorite story in the book that I'll end on comes from Alabama, and it's also about felony disenfranchisement. It was, it starts when a woman named Sherry is 17 years old, and she is with a bunch of friends in rural Alabama. They're having, fast food on the hood of a car. It's a typical teenage night, except they were also smoking something that they probably shouldn't have been in 1990s Alabama. And when a policeman rolled up and wanted to know what that odor was, all of these 17-year-olds ended the night with felony convictions. And in the state of Alabama, a felony conviction took away your right to vote forever at that time, which also dates back to the days after the Civil War, when all of these state constitutions were passed, making minor crimes into felonies. And she lost her voting rights forever before she was even able to use them once. And we were working with a group that helped pass a law that ended that in Alabama, except the state wouldn't do anything to help find these people, 75,000 of them. And so we were going door to door, hanging out at bus stations, at libraries, at malls, at barbershops, trying to find people. And we walked up to Sherry on this hot morning, and she doesn't want anything to do with us on our way to work. And we said, the laws have changed around voting. If you know anybody, we can get you your right to vote back. And she's like, wait, really? As long as it wasn't, a crime having to do with, murder, you could get reinstated right there. And we signed her up on the spot, and there wasn't a dry eye, I think, among us. And it feels to me like those are the people who we are fighting for. We are fighting for people like Sherry when we are in this fight right now for our democracy, for voting rights. This is a nation that has been built by people, improved by the people, whether it's the marchers for suffrage, whether it's the marchers across Selma's Pettus Bridge, and that responsibility has now been passed to all of us who believe in the possibility of change, all of us who believe in the notion of equal protection under the law, of one person, one vote, who believe that democracy is a verb, something we have to actively tend and protect because it is precious and it can be lost. And the battles and the struggles and the very real victories that I try to chronicle in this book, even I think in a dark moment, are a reminder that these fights can be won, and that they can be won by all of us, by people with felony convictions, by young people working at recycling plants, by folks who buy an RV and set out to make change. We can do this ourselves. Thank you.
Well, that was very inspiring, doing something positive around voting rights. That's something we need to hear more of. Thank you, David. Next, we're going to be hearing from Alice C. Early. Yay! Alice is a recovering international business workaholic. She's a writer, a singer, an avid cook, given to experimenting on guests with her gluten-free baking. The Moon Always Rising is her award-winning debut novel. She lives in Martha's Vineyard, apart from annual visits since 1996, to the Caribbean island of Nevis, where much of her novel is set. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you. It's such a thrill to be here. And the more I hear about the credentials, the lives of writing, the awards that have been won by my colleagues in the Lockdown Literature Group, the more and more I feel like I just stepped off the boat. I've only been writing, this is my debut novel. This is the beginning. I hope it's not the end of my writing career, but I had a long career, several careers actually, doing a bunch of other things in college and university administration, in business, and most recently doing career transition coaching. And so this is my first rodeo, but it's my fourth quarter. So I have learned so much from the very generous people in this Lockdown Literature Group who have been there before and are so willing to share and have been just enormously helpful with tweeting things out, but also just with guidance and encouragement, because launching as I did on April 20th of 2020, everything was changed and it was all new to me to begin with. So I usually, see my book, it's got all kinds of little stickies in it because I have lots of different places that I read when I'm reading with book groups mostly, because this is the first time that I've actually read in a bookstore. And I'm thrilled to be here. But I am going to read from the very beginning of the book because that will mean that I don't have to explain too much about a sort of a long list of characters and a convoluted plot. This book does take place partly in Nevis, an island in the Caribbean, and partly in Scotland. My lead character is a Scottish woman, 33-year-old woman, And she is about to encounter Nevis for the first time in this opening chapter. So chapter 1, Nevis, West Indies, November 1999. The seven-seater plane roared over the Caribbean toward the green cone of the island where Els Gordon would serve out the sentence handed down by her boss, a week's holiday that chagrined her like a toddler's timeout. "If you don't get a grip before you come back," the wanker had said. He hadn't specified the consequences. The plane fishtailed low over the deserted beach rimmed with jungle before rattling to its landing. Steam room heat assaulted Els when she crossed the yielding tarmac, a jolt from the icy drizzle that she'd left home at Heathrow. The immigration officer perused her form. "You neglected to state the purpose of your visit." As neither business nor pleasure covered it, she stared at him too long before saying, "Penance?" He regarded her unamused, then checked the pleasure box. He peeled back the Scottish national flag covering the cover that she'd put on her passport, revealing its Westminster-issued European Union burgundy. After examining pages with entry stamps from the US, Asia, and South America, he found an empty spot and clacked down his stamp. A cabbie hurried her to his taxi van in time to beat the dust devil that swirled across the construction zone, engulfing the terminal. Turning the van toward the ball of afternoon sun, he swept his arm to take in the scalped land and heavy machinery. New airport, going to accommodate jets, change fortunes for all we. "Mind what you wish for," Els said. "Even when we reach the 21st century, Neva's going to always be the Queen of the Caribbees," he patted his chest, "and I am this little island's best ambassador. You want my special tour?" "All I want is a cold drink and a hot bath," she said, already wondering how she'd survive a week in this tiny place. When they crested Hurricane Hill, the sea spreading out before her was a wash of undulating sparkles. The brightness was invasive. She felt nature was strutting, taunting her. "You here for the doctor meeting at the resort?" "Nah, on my own," she said, recoiling from the thought that she might be walking into a convention of men as arrogant as the investment banking colleagues she'd just left behind. Just beyond the boundary sign for the Parish of St. Thomas Lowland, dung-splattered sheep milling in the road halted the van's progress in front of a cinder block wall. Higher up the hill, Els glimpsed a house nestled into the slope. Unlike the pastel concrete dwellings they'd passed, it looked ancient, a survivor, with proportions that charmed her. Its weathered shingles and native stone walls stood in counterpoint to the riot of color poking through the garden's devastation. Plywood blindfolded its windows. An estate agent's sign dangled from the padlocked gate. The cabbie snuck a peek at the house, waved his arm out the window, and yelled at the sheep. "I'm in no hurry," Els said, "for once." "Get a move on, miss." He leaned on the horn and whispered, "Lord, let we pass now." With the ewes bleating encouragement, the babies huddled enough to clear a path. The cabbie drove away so swiftly he nearly clipped a straggling lamb. Els twisted in her seat for another look, but they'd rounded a curve, and the house had disappeared. "So, Mr. Ambassador," she said, "what's the story behind that place?" He gripped the wheel and said nothing. A bit farther on, he slowed for a hairpin curve, tipped his head toward a seawall, and said, "Jack, he gone, but he ain't left yet." "Jack's the owner?" "For 20 years, maybe." He turned the radio to a preacher's oration and didn't speak again, leaving Els to ponder why this Jack would surrender such a treasure to rot and strangling vegetation, and why no buyer had jumped to save it. She'd always told herself that love and attention could coax anything abandoned back to life. The cabbie drove down the resort's alley of palm trees and up to the great house entrance. After handing Els's luggage to the porter, he whipped out a card reading, "Sparrow's Custom Tours. See the Nevis beyond the beach and the peak." "The real Nevis," she said. "Sparrow show you the sights, tell you the legends," he said. "Real, you gotta find on your own." Needing no assistance pulling her small wheelie or finding her room, Els felt ridiculous tagging along behind Anthony, the porter dispatched with great ceremony by the front desk, who took the long way in order to point out the beach, pool, and dining pavilion. The paths meandered between plants that seemed to reach for her, their foliage in shapes of green, burgundy, and purple, as if Gauguin had created the scene. When Anthony greeted two uniformed women and they replied in incomprehensible patois, Else felt an old stab of otherness. "Welcome to Hibiscus Villa," Anthony said, and waved her inside. She eyed the romantic mahogany plantation bed and thought what a narrow, solitary dent she would make. "What's this, the honeymoon suite?" she said. She felt as spiky as the arrangement of protea on the coffee table. "Sometimes," he said. She pressed a tip into Anthony's hand, hoping to curtail his narration of the suite's amenities. He instructed her to enjoy her stay and backed out the door. Alone with only the whir of the ceiling fan and the pulse of the surf, she was rooted in the middle of the floor, unaware of how long she stood there, when a discreet knock brought her back to the present. The young woman at the door, with a name tag Alanisha, wheeled in a cart bearing a bottle of champagne and a sweating ice bucket with a frangipani blossom floating in a small bowl. "Compliments of the management?" Bells asked. Alanisha handed her a card that read, "Find someone to share this with. Loosen up and come back a new woman." It was signed Cox. Else wondered if this meant the champagne, the bed, or both. It was just like Cox to assume anything could be righted by a good fuck, preferably while drunk. Fury sent a flush to her face and she fanned herself with the card. Alanisha peered at her. "Ma'am, you okay?" "Jet lag," Else said. After Alanisha slipped out the door, Else flung the card at the champagne and watched it sink into the ice bath. The frangipani's aggressive scent filled the room. Mind what you wished for, Else chided herself. Festive champagne was hardly the cold drink she had in mind, and a hot bath at the moment might make her explode. She peeled off her sweat-dampened clothing, stepped into the shower, and stood under a cool stream until she felt rinsed, if not cleansed. Wrapped in a huge towel, she went out to her terrace and shielded her eyes against the low sun, which made a couple strolling the beach hand in hand look dipped in toffee. Over the past year, icy anger had frozen her grief into her bones. But recently, the marrow seemed overwhelmed by the effort of this compression and had begun emitting a kind of fog, like dry ice vapors, that replaced the air in her lungs and slowed her brain. It was as if these noxious vapors were wreathing her words, further sharpening her already lacerating tongue. She'd begun messing up at work enough to give the ever-cycling hyenas in her department a whiff of vulnerability. Cox had flashed his fake compassion smile when he'd said, "I strongly recommend you take this opportunity to get over, well, whatever it is." She'd imagined driving the Mont Blanc fountain pen he so fancied straight into his jugular, as if a few days of Caribbean frolic could erase all that had brought her to this point.
Thank you, Alice. That was great. Our final reader for today is Brad Fox. Brad is a writer and a teacher who lives in Harlem. His work has appeared in the New Yorker, Guernica, I never know if I say that, Guernica, if I say it correctly, and in the 2014 Whitney Biennial. His latest novel is To Remain Nameless, which has been called, quote, a gorgeous meditation on a shifting self in a shifting world, as well as daring, vivid, and utterly original. Welcome to Brad.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thanks for organizing. This is amazing. So I'm just going to read the beginning because then I don't have to set up the premise. And then I'm going to read just a little bit more from later on. Okay, so yeah, To Remain Nameless. Only immediate family, the triage receptionist said. Your friend can wait right here. It'll just be a minute or two. Tess watched Laura about to protest with her flushed face and heaving belly. How can you argue with a woman in labor? A nurse stood at the swinging doors trying to lead her patient back into the examination room, but Laura planted both feet and turned to Tess. You promised you won't let them give me an epidural, remember? I want to feel everything. Tess nodded, brown hair falling in her face. I'm sure I'll ask for drugs. I'm scared and weak, but don't listen to me. As the nurse started to lead her away, Laura pointed at the piece of paper Tess held in her hand. I'll ask, Laura said, but you have cotton in your ears. Remember, I want to feel everything. The doors to the examination room swung shut, leaving Tess under the buzzing lights of triage. She looked down at the paper. Across the top, it read, Laura Valerio, birth plan. And there it was, item number 1. I am a weakling and a coward. Tess laughed out loud as she saw her bearings, alone now for the first time in days. Laura, a coward and a weakling, how could she ever believe that? But she'd never felt a labor contraction, had no idea how intense it could be. She dropped down into a black vinyl chair against the wall, the room empty except for the triage receptionist, now talking on the phone with a big smile across her face. Immediate? Who was more immediate than Tess? She felt the cold, air-conditioned air through the loose shirt she wore. She crossed and uncrossed her legs, head still reeling. She looked down at the sparkling tiles. Labor, she thought. Now it's starting. Once in the village above Aswan, there'd been a woman in labor, and as they waited for the midwife, the woman made such strange noises that Tess walked out into the whitewashed alleyways and paced up and down, stopping in front of the old tomb to ask the dead sheikh what that sound could be. And now Laura at 39, who abandoned Tess in the Istanbul office to come back and nurse her own mother in her deathbed, to sit uncomplainingly as her mother wasted away after working through crisis after crisis, war and famine and bullshit development assignment. Now she was in triage, asking for drugs. Give me drugs! Tess stood back up and took a step toward the door. There was hardly room to pace in here. Her body was awkward and she wished she could be inside with Laura. Wished she knew what there was to do. Wished she'd learned everything there was to learn. What had the Egyptian midwife known? Surely there were things to do in this situation that didn't involve inserting a tube into your spine. Laura had begged her to be here, Laura who had never asked for anything. It's a pain unlike any other, that's what I hear. Please be with me. But I don't know anything about it, Tess told her. I don't know anything. It doesn't matter. I want you with me. You have to be there. So she flew from Ataturk Airport and landed at JFK, and 5 days later, here she was, 7:48 p.m., 12th floor of St. Luke's Roosevelt, just down from Columbus Circle. 5 days, and it was like she'd been excised from her life. Could hardly remember what awaited her. The caseload, the swelling camps, the endless state of emergency. All that was far away, and she was here in this waiting room too small to pace in, pushing her knee against the black vinyl of the chair. The triage nurse gabbing away on the phone, and Tess could understand every word. Could not understand, really. That was closer to the situation. Back in the US, here in this unfamiliar New York, everyone all around speaking her language. When she landed, she thought they must be speaking to her, a colleague, or a voice over the phone. Did you find out where they're being held? And how long is the extension? After 5 days, she still wasn't used to it. Found herself turning her head involuntarily on the street. Who said that? Who was that? Suspicious, a little paranoid. Relax, she told herself. This is your home country. You have every right to be here. It's important to Laura, and these friendships formed in such conditions that had lasted this long. It's important to hold on to something. What else did she have? She had to be here. To be a true friend, at least. If Laura was going to cry and suffer and birth a baby in New York, then she would come. Couldn't very well leave her alone. The guy was supposed to be around somewhere, but Tess still hadn't seen a sign of him, whoever he was. Laura too proud to push him, probably. But she could ask Tess, and she knew Tess would come if she could, and she did, and she had. But Tess hadn't expected the triage nurse to make her wait here in the waiting room, just a minute or two. They lie, Tess thought. She listened for Laura screaming her head off in the next room, about to give birth, for God's sake, to bring new life into the world, to add another version of herself. Madness. In this country, empire crumbling, waters rising, Manhattan turned over to bankers and tourists. And this receptionist on the phone, where did she live? Her slight Caribbean lilt, parents from Trinidad or something, that melody. People of this city, this hemisphere. Never heard that accent in all the places she lived. Did she ever hear that beautiful Caribbean lilt on the streets of Istanbul? a Bronx accent among the doctors in Kosovo. There was a guy from Harlem in Macedonia. What was his name? Richard Bright or something like that. Or who said he was from Harlem. Who knows where he was from? A white man from Harlem with his bald head and yellow eyes, with his straight spine and his very correct way of speaking, flattened, stilted, any character hammered out, like he'd been printed out or was an iteration of something. Later, he said he lived in Utah or somewhere, Montana, had moved out west from Harlem to teach survivalism. They were sure he was some kind of agent. Everyone was supposedly some kind of agent, but Richard Bright, with his survivalism and his hammered out accent, was maybe more likely than others. How long had it taken him to learn to talk like that, perfectly stilted and proper and underneath menacing? Is that how they talk in Utah and Montana? Back home in Kansas City, her half-brother Max used to tell her about his neighbors in the southern suburbs, with their big smiles and their clipped lawns, and their children locked up in the basement, body parts buried in the backyard. Eat the liver, Richard Bright said. If you're trapped in the mountains and the only food is the body of another person, eat the liver first. That's the most nutritious part. When she met him, the way everyone met in those circles, Tess thought he was a horrible asshole. But that didn't stop Laura from going to bed with him, or had it, his shiny bald head bobbing up and down. Go for the liver. One thing you could say about Laura, she'd always wanted to feel everything. I just want to read one. This is a couple of paragraphs later on in the book. So most of the book takes place in her memory. Tess is thinking about their life together, their work that they did in different places. Goes from like the Balkans to Cairo and then Istanbul kind of towards the end. So here they're in Istanbul. They're working at an office that provides legal advice to refugees. And they're completely overwhelmed. Everything's in total chaos, and there's some potential donors visiting from Stockholm, 2 Swedish guys. And they have these ideas. They want to give them some new computer system, update their like IT technology. And they're like, we don't need your IT technology. Like, we need staff, we need people, we need legal advisors, we need money, you know? And so they're in this situation, and they're like, well, we'd like to help, blah, 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 blah. And so Laura cuts them off. And she says, the guy's like, I want you to. And she's like, I know, Laura. Went on, I know you do, but listen. We're telling you something that will help us. Because we will have, at least temporarily, a few more legal advisors that we don't have to pay for, which will allow us to work through our caseload. We're backed up here, hundreds of cases. Just yesterday, we had to send staff to Ataturk Airport with emergency forms to halt the deportation of 12 Afghan nationals. We have a collective center in Karakoy that houses several hundred unaccompanied minors that may or may not be closed by the Interior Ministry next month. We have 10 Central African migrants sleeping in the attic of an Episcopalian church around the corner. We have a situation on the border with Syria that no one knows where it's headed. She paused for a second, and Tess turned to them with a shrug. You'll have to decide whether your goal is to go back to Stockholm with a digestible report for your superiors, or whether your goal is to learn to adapt to situations, to listen and respond, and to have a chance of not making things worse. By 10 o'clock, they were sitting in an alleyway off Istiklal with dozens of empty plates in front of them, the last remnants of sardines and liver, of garlic-boiled seagrasses and pistachio halva, smoking Rothmans from the Stockholm airport, and drinking raka with water. Laura now pulled out her chair and got up. Tess watched her climb on top of the table, squat there with her shoes between the empty plates. Laura bunched up her skirt, pressed her palms down on her knees, and pissed. She pissed out all the forms and reports and information requests and extensions and follow-up grant proposals and ROAs and tax documents that had ever passed through her fingers. So it all poured from the tabletop onto the concrete alley off Istiklal, seeped into the sewer, and ran down to the Bosporus, and then the Marmara and the Mediterranean, dissolving into the soup the dolphins leapt through at the gates of Hercules. Then she reached over to plant a big muscled kiss on each of the pliant mouths of these visitors from the West.
I have been left stunned by vivid imagery from our friend Brad. Thank you all for coming here. Please talk to the authors afterwards, get signed copies. We're going to be posting this video on YouTube, and I will share all the links. And I'm so glad that we got to meet each other in person. Thank you.
Actually, do we have all the authors up front for a quick photo?
Yes. You wanted me to get the lockdown lit thing?
I'll get it.
Okay. All right.
Sure.
Sure.
Just right up front.
Okay.
Have a team photo.
I figured it would be. That was awesome.
And thank you.
I know. It's been so long. Scott. All right.
Yes.
Okay.
We look like a chorus line here.
An awesome chorus line.
Yes, indeed. You could, especially starting with Leslie's skirt.
Yeah, that's right.
It'd be super kicky.
Yeah, super.